Long before the bright lights of Johannesburg captured her attention, Naledi lived a simple and peaceful life in a small village where everyone knew each other. The village was surrounded by green hills, dusty roads, and beautiful open fields. The houses were small, and most families worked very hard just to survive. Although life was not easy, the people shared what little they had, and kindness was more valuable than money. Every morning before sunrise, Naledi woke up without anyone reminding her. While many young people were still asleep, she had already made her bed, swept the yard, fetched water, and helped her mother prepare breakfast. She never complained because she understood how hard her parents worked every single day. She believed that helping her family was one way of showing love and respect. After finishing her morning chores, Naledi carefully put on her clean school uniform, packed her books into her old school bag, and prepared for another day at school. Her books were always neat because she treated education as the greatest gift she had ever received. Before leaving the house, she greeted both of her parents with a smile. They always reminded her to work hard because they believed that education was the only path that could change the family's future. As Naledi walked to school along the dusty village road, many neighbors greeted her warmly. Everyone knew her as a respectful, humble, and hard-working young girl. The elderly people often smiled proudly whenever they saw her carrying her books because they believed she would become someone important one day. Children looked up to her because she was always willing to encourage them to study and never give up on their dreams. When Naledi arrived at school, she immediately focused on her lessons. She sat quietly in the front row, listened carefully to every explanation, and wrote down every important note. Her teachers admired her discipline and determination because she never allowed distractions to take her attention away from her studies. She understood that every lesson was another step toward achieving the future she had always imagined. A few days later, the teacher handed back the class tests. The classroom became silent as everyone waited for their results. When the teacher announced that Naledi had achieved the highest marks in the class once again, her classmates clapped with excitement. Her teacher smiled proudly and reminded the entire class that success always follows hard work, discipline, and determination. Naledi accepted her test paper with humility, thanking her teacher before quietly returning to her seat. After school, Naledi walked home carrying her books against her chest. Along the way, she thought about the future she wanted for herself and her family. She dreamed of becoming a university graduate, finding a good job, and helping her parents live a better life. She wanted to build a proper house for them, make sure they never worried about money again, and give back for every sacrifice they had made. That evening, as the family gathered around the dinner table, Naledi finally shared the dream she had been carrying in her heart for many years. She looked at her parents and softly told them that she wanted to study at the University of Johannesburg. For a few moments, the room became completely quiet. Her parents looked at one another before smiling with pride. Although they knew they were poor, they also knew that dreams could become reality through hard work and faith. Her father gently held Naledi's hand and told her that money could disappear, but education would remain with her forever. He reminded her that nobody could ever steal knowledge from a person who was willing to learn. Her mother agreed and encouraged Naledi never to lose hope, no matter how difficult life became. They promised to support her in every way they could, even if it meant making great sacrifices. From that day onward, Naledi studied even harder than before. She spent long evenings reading her books while her parents quietly watched with pride. Every page she read brought her one step closer to the future she dreamed about. Deep inside her heart, she believed that one day she would walk through the gates of the University of Johannesburg and return home as a graduate who had changed her family's life forever. As the stars filled the night sky above the village, Naledi stood outside her home and looked toward the distant horizon. She smiled with hope, completely unaware that the journey she was about to begin would bring joy, heartbreak, temptation, painful lessons, and life-changing decisions that would test everything she believed in. The morning was filled with mixed emotions as Naledi stood quietly inside her small bedroom, carefully packing the few clothes she owned into an old suitcase. Every shirt she folded and every book she placed inside reminded her of the long journey that had brought her to this moment. Her family had sacrificed so much to make sure she could continue her education. Although their home was simple and their money was limited, they had never stopped believing that one day Naledi would become the first person in their family to graduate from university. As Naledi packed her belongings, her mother walked into the room carrying a small Bible. She gently placed it inside the suitcase before holding Naledi's hands. Looking into her daughter's eyes, she reminded her that life would not always be easy. She encouraged Naledi to pray, stay humble, and never forget the values she had been taught at home. Naledi smiled warmly and promised that no matter where life took her, she would always remember her family and the lessons they had given her. A few moments later, Naledi's father entered the room. He reached into his pocket and handed her the little money he had managed to save after many months of hard work. It was not much, but to him it meant everything. He told Naledi that the money was not just for transport or food. It was a symbol of his faith in her future. He believed that one day she would build a better life, not only for herself but for the whole family. Naledi accepted the money with tears in her eyes, knowing how much her parents had sacrificed for her education. When it was finally time to leave, the family walked together along the dusty road toward the taxi rank. The neighbors smiled, waved goodbye, and wished Naledi success in Johannesburg. Everyone in the village knew how intelligent she was, and many hoped she would return one day as a successful graduate who would inspire other young people to dream beyond their circumstances. At the taxi rank, the emotional goodbye became even more difficult. Naledi hugged her mother tightly while her father quietly placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Her mother fought back tears as she reminded her daughter to stay away from trouble and to always remember why she was going to university. Naledi promised them that she would study hard, make them proud, and never disappoint them. The taxi slowly pulled away from the village, and Naledi looked through the window as the familiar houses became smaller and smaller. She watched the dusty roads disappear behind her and whispered a silent promise to herself that she would return home one day with a university qualification and a better future for her family. The long journey to Johannesburg gave Naledi plenty of time to think. As the taxi traveled past mountains, rivers, farms, and busy towns, she imagined the life waiting for her. She dreamed about attending lectures, making new friends, graduating with excellent results, and finding a good job that would lift her family out of poverty forever. Every kilometer brought her closer to the future she had always imagined. Several hours later, the taxi finally entered Johannesburg. Naledi pressed her face gently against the window as she looked at the towering buildings, busy highways, colorful billboards, and crowds of people moving quickly through the streets. Everything felt alive. It was unlike anything she had ever seen before. The city was beautiful, exciting, and full of endless possibilities. When she finally arrived at the University of Johannesburg, Naledi stood quietly at the entrance and looked around with amazement. Students walked confidently across the campus carrying books and laptops, while others sat on benches talking and laughing together. The modern buildings, beautiful gardens, and peaceful surroundings made her heart beat with excitement. She smiled to herself and whispered that this was where her new life would begin. Not long after arriving, Naledi met a friendly student named Zoma. She welcomed Naledi with a warm smile and offered to help her settle into university life. Naledi felt relieved because she had been worried about being alone in a city where she knew almost nobody. She thanked Zoma sincerely, believing she had found a kind and trustworthy friend. Later that evening, after unpacking her suitcase inside her residence room, Naledi called her parents. They were eager to hear whether she had arrived safely. With a bright smile, Naledi assured them that everything was going well. She described the beautiful campus, the friendly students, and her comfortable room. Hearing the happiness in her voice brought peace to her parents' hearts. They reminded her once again to work hard, stay focused, and never lose sight of her dream. As the call ended, Naledi stood beside the window of her residence room and looked at the bright lights of Johannesburg shining across the night sky. She smiled with hope, believing that she was standing at the beginning of the greatest journey of her life. She had no idea that the city she admired so much would soon test her character, challenge her dreams, and place difficult choices before her that would change her future forever. Naledi woke up early the next morning with a heart full of excitement. This was the beginning of the life she had always dreamed about. She carefully picked up her books, adjusted her glasses, took a deep breath, and walked into her first university classroom. Everything looked new. The students, the large lecture hall, and the serious atmosphere made her realize that she was finally living her dream. As the lecture began, Naledi listened with full attention. Every word from the lecture mattered to her. She wrote down every important note because she believed that education was the key to changing her family's future. While many students looked around the classroom, Naledi kept her eyes on her books. She promised herself that she would never waste the opportunity her parents had worked so hard to give her. When the lecture ended, Naledi slowly walked out of the classroom carrying her books. That was when she met a quiet young man named Thabo. Unlike many students around him, Thabo was calm, respectful, and focused on his studies. After introducing himself, he welcomed Naledi to the university and encouraged her to remain disciplined. He reminded her that university life could be exciting, but only those who stayed focused would achieve their dreams. Naledi appreciated his advice and thanked him with a smile. As Naledi continued walking across the campus, she met three cheerful girls named Zoma, Ayanda, and Lindayo. They were confident, fashionable, and full of energy. They warmly welcomed Naledi into their group, making her feel comfortable in a city where she hardly knew anyone. For the first time since arriving in Johannesburg, she felt like she had found friends. The four girls spent the afternoon together, sharing lunch, laughing, and getting to know one another. They talked about university life, their dreams, and the exciting places they loved to visit around Johannesburg. Naledi enjoyed every moment because everything was so different from the quiet village where she had grown up. While they were talking, Zoma took out her phone and showed Naledi pictures from their previous weekends. There were beautiful restaurants, stylish clothes, exciting events, and places Naledi had never seen before. She stared at the pictures with amazement. Johannesburg suddenly looked even more exciting than she had imagined. Before they went home, Zoma smiled and invited Naledi to spend the coming weekend with them. Naledi became curious and asked where they were going. The girl simply laughed and told her it was a surprise she would never forget. Their excitement made Naledi even more interested. As Naledi walked away with her new friends, she could not stop smiling. Everything seemed perfect. She believed she had found people who would make university life fun and unforgettable. Not far behind them, Thabo quietly watched the group walking across the campus. Deep inside, he hoped Naledi would always remember the reason she had traveled all the way from her village to Johannesburg. He knew that one small decision could change a person's future forever. Naledi had no idea that this simple invitation was the first step toward a journey that would test her dreams, her choices, and everything her parents believed in. The days at university passed quickly, and Naledi slowly became more comfortable with her new life in Johannesburg. Every morning she attended her classes, completed her assignments, and tried her best to stay focused. However, after classes ended, she spent more and more time with her new friends, Zoma, Ayanda, and Lindayo. They were always cheerful, fashionable, and full of exciting stories about the city. Being around them made Naledi feel like she finally belonged. One afternoon, the girls invited Naledi to go shopping with them. It was the first time she had ever visited such a large shopping mall. As they walked through the bright stores, Naledi looked around with amazement. Everywhere she looked there were beautiful clothes, expensive shoes, sparkling jewelry, and happy people enjoying themselves. It was a world completely different from the quiet village she had left behind. The girls laughed as they picked stylish outfits from the shelves. They encouraged Naledi to try on clothes she had never imagined wearing before. At first, she felt shy and uncomfortable because she was used to dressing simply. But as she stood in front of the mirror, she smiled. For the first time, she saw a different side of herself. Her friends clapped their hands and told her she looked beautiful. Their compliments made her feel confident, and she began to enjoy the attention. After leaving the clothing store, the girls stopped at a popular coffee shop. They ordered drinks and snacks while talking about campus life, fashion, expensive restaurants, and exciting weekend events. Naledi listened carefully to every conversation. Everything sounded glamorous and exciting. She had never imagined that university life could be like this. As they talked, Zoma took out her phone and began showing Naledi pictures and videos from their previous weekends. There were luxury cars, beautiful hotels, crowded parties, and smiling students living what seemed to be a perfect life. Naledi stared at the screen with wide eyes. Deep inside, she wondered if this was the kind of life she had been missing. At that very moment, Thabo was sitting quietly inside the university library. While many students were relaxing outside, he remained focused on his books. He believed that success came through discipline and hard work. As he studied, he thought about Naledi and hoped she was making good decisions. Later that afternoon, Thabo met Naledi on campus. He greeted her warmly and reminded her not to forget the reason she had traveled all the way from her village to Johannesburg. He encouraged her to balance her studies with her social life and warned her that distractions could easily destroy even the brightest future. Naledi appreciated his concern and thanked him politely. However, before their conversation could continue, she noticed her friends waiting for her nearby. They called her name with excitement, and without thinking too much, she smiled, said goodbye to Thabo, and hurried to join them. Thabo watched her walk away, and a quiet feeling of worry filled his heart. Before they went home, Zoma showed Naledi an invitation on her phone for another exciting weekend outing. The girls could hardly hide their excitement as they spoke about the event. They promised Naledi that it would be one of the best experiences of her life. Although she smiled, a small voice inside her heart reminded her of the promises she had made to her parents before leaving home. That evening, Naledi sat alone on a bench outside her residence. She looked up at the evening sky and thought about everything that had happened over the past few days. On one side was the dream of graduating and changing her family's future. On the other side was a new world filled with excitement, popularity, and adventure. She did not know which path would shape her future. As the sun slowly disappeared behind the buildings of Johannesburg, Naledi stood up and looked toward her friends waiting for her in the distance. She took a deep breath and slowly walked in their direction, unaware that every decision she made from this moment onward would bring her closer to a future she had never expected. Saturday evening finally arrived, and the excitement that had been building inside Naledi all week was impossible to hide. She stood quietly in front of the mirror inside her university residence room, carefully fixing her hair and straightening her clothes. For a moment, she smiled at her reflection. Everything about her life felt new. Only a few weeks earlier, she had been a quiet village girl who dreamed of becoming a successful graduate. Now she was preparing for her very first weekend outing in Johannesburg. Just as she picked up her handbag, her phone rang. It was Zoma. "We are waiting outside," she said excitedly. Naledi took a deep breath, locked her room, and hurried downstairs. Outside, Zoma, Ayanda, and Lindai were already waiting for her, dressed beautifully and laughing together. They greeted Naledi with warm smiles and complimented her appearance, making her feel even more confident. She had never imagined that she would one day fit in with such fashionable and confident friends. The four girls left the university together, talking happily as they walked toward the parking area. Everything around Naledi felt exciting. The busy streets, the bright lights, and the endless movement of Johannesburg made her feel as though she had stepped into another world. Every minute she spent in the city made her curious to experience even more. Soon they climbed into a luxury car that belonged to one of their friends. As the car drove through the streets of Johannesburg, Naledi looked out of the window with amazement. She saw tall buildings shining with colorful lights, expensive restaurants filled with happy people, beautiful hotels, luxury cars, and busy roads that seemed full of endless opportunities. She could hardly believe that this was the same country she had always known. After a short drive, the car finally stopped outside one of the city's most popular entertainment venues. The place was alive with bright lights, beautiful decorations, expensive cars, and groups of stylish young people laughing together. Naledi stood silently for a few seconds as she looked around. Everything felt bigger, brighter, and more glamorous than anything she had ever experienced before. As they walked inside, music filled the air and people greeted one another with smiles. Naledi noticed that many students seemed to know each other. Some were taking photos, others were talking about business ideas, while others simply enjoyed spending time together. It was a world she had only imagined while growing up in her small village. Before long, Zoma introduced Naledi to several well-dressed young men. They spoke confidently, wore expensive watches, drove luxury cars, and seemed to have everything a young person could dream of. Naledi listened carefully as they spoke about success, money, expensive holidays, and enjoying life. Their confidence impressed her, and she quietly wondered if one day she could also live such a comfortable life. As the evening continued, Naledi found herself enjoying every moment. She laughed with her new friends, admired the beautiful surroundings, and slowly began to forget about the assignments waiting for her back at the university. For the first time since arriving in Johannesburg, the excitement of city life seemed more attractive than the quiet discipline she had promised herself. At that very same moment, far away from the noise and bright lights, Thabo sat alone in the university library. His books were open in front of him as he continued studying for the upcoming tests. He believed that every hour spent studying was another step closer to achieving his dreams. For a brief moment, he thought about Naledi and hoped she was making wise decisions. He remembered the determination he had seen in her eyes on the first day they met and quietly prayed that she would never lose sight of her purpose. Later that night, Naledi and her friends finally returned to the university residence. The campus had become quiet, and the cool evening breeze gently moved through the trees. As Naledi walked back to her room, she could not stop thinking about everything she had seen. The glamorous lifestyle, the confident people, and the exciting atmosphere had made a powerful impression on her heart. She stood beside her window and looked out at the sparkling lights of Johannesburg stretching across the night sky. A small smile appeared on her face as she imagined the kind of future she wanted. But deep inside, without even realizing it, something had already begun to change. The city that had once inspired her to work hard was slowly beginning to tempt her with a completely different dream. And although Naledi did not know it yet, this unforgettable night would become the first step toward a journey filled with difficult choices, painful mistakes, and life-changing consequences. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more emotional African stories. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story. Did Naledi make the right choice? Tell us in the comments.